Evil doesn't always scream, sometimes it smiles, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. Real evil isn't loud, it doesn't come crashing through your door. It walks in gently, disguised as charm, concern, or quiet advice. It flatters, it nods, it listens, and slowly it rewires your mind until you no longer trust yourself. That's not bad luck, that's a calculated pattern. That's manipulation in motion. Have you ever left a conversation feeling drained for no reason? Or doubted your memory, your worth, your instincts after someone helped you? You may be in the presence of someone quietly toxic. Not dramatic, not violent, just subtly destructive. Stoicism doesn't ask you to react, it teaches you to recognize. It trains your mind to spot early signs of danger, lies without remorse, fake empathy, hidden envy, and people who seek control under the mask of care. When you understand how to protect your energy stoically, you no longer chase closure, explanations, or approval. You walk away clear, calm, and powerful. This video will reveal 10 psychological red flags, evident, observable, and often overlooked. You'll learn how to respond with inner control, not emotional reactivity. If you've ever felt emotionally drained, manipulated, or underestimated, this message is for you. Like this video if you're ready to guard your peace. Subscribe and hit the bell, because awareness is the first shield. Let's begin. 1. A mask of charm. Charm doesn't always mean safety. In fact, the most manipulative people often hide behind the warmest smiles. They study what makes others feel seen, valued, and understood, and they use it as a tool, not a gift. When someone seems almost too polished, too generous with compliments, too quick to make you feel special, it's not always a coincidence. It may be a strategy. Emotional predators don't start by attacking you. They begin by disarming you. Their weapon is charm, calculated, practiced, and carefully targeted. They observe your need for recognition, your craving to feel understood, and they reflect it back like a mirror. Not because they care, but because they want access to your trust, your weakness, your patterns. That access becomes influence, and influence becomes control. This type of behavior is hard to detect because it doesn't feel wrong at first. It feels validating. You meet someone at work or in your social circle who always knows the right thing to say. They make you feel noticed, supported, and safe. But over time, subtle warning signs emerge. They always want to be your only confidant. They make comments that question the loyalty of your closest friends. They isolate you not through force, but through suggestion. And when something feels off, they quickly reinforce their innocence with flattery, humor, or emotional stories. Stoicism urges us to remain skeptical of surface impressions. As Epictetus warned, appearances are often misleading. A person's true nature is revealed not in what they say, but in what they repeat when no one is watching. Stoic clarity doesn't ask us to be cold, but to be conscious. Kindness is beautiful when it is consistent, but when it flickers based on gain, it becomes a signal. A common mistake is confusing charisma with character. Many people assume that someone who makes them feel good must be good for them. But this is exactly how manipulative personalities thrive. They feed on emotional reactions. They build trust not through truth, but through performance. And because they rarely show aggression, they avoid suspicion. Imagine someone who enters your life when you're emotionally vulnerable, perhaps after a breakup, a loss, or a change in career. They seem like a savior, attentive, empathetic, full of guidance. At first, their presence feels healing, but gradually, you notice their influence grows while your independence shrinks. You ask for their opinion more often than you should. You feel guilty when you set boundaries. You second-guess your choices, always wondering what they would say. And in that moment, your peace is no longer yours. The Stoic path demands self-awareness. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If someone's presence slowly changes the way you think about yourself, makes you feel less capable, less whole, more dependent, you must pause. That is not love. That is erosion. To reclaim your clarity, step back and observe. Don't announce it, just watch. How do they treat others who can't offer them anything? How do they speak about people who once trusted them? Do their words match their patterns or just the moment? The answer won't be found in their smile. It will be found in the space between their actions. And once you see the disconnect, your responsibility is to respond, not with confrontation, but with quiet disengagement. You don't need to accuse, you don't need to explain. You simply need to stop feeding the performance. One practice that restores your center is silence. Don't rush to reassure them. Don't rush to please. Hold your voice. Give yourself time. Distance brings perspective. And when charm no longer confuses you, your intuition sharpens. In that stillness, truth becomes visible. And so does the person behind the mask. 2. Constant manipulation control doesn't always look like domination. Often, it arrives in the form of subtle guidance, helpful suggestions, and carefully crafted concern. The person manipulating you doesn't shout, they whisper. They appear supportive, emotionally intelligent, maybe even indispensable. But beneath the surface, their true intention isn't to support your growth. It's to slowly redirect your choices until they own your sense of direction. Manipulation thrives on distortion. It doesn't force decisions, it bends them. It reframes your thoughts so that what benefits them starts to feel like what's best for you. And when someone consistently positions themselves as your emotional compass, pay attention. That's not leadership. That's dependency disguised as help. A manipulative person doesn't immediately challenge your boundaries. Instead, they make you question your own instincts. They highlight your doubts, emphasize your failures, and exaggerate your mistakes, always under the banner of concern. At first, it sounds like guidance. I just want what's best for you. But gradually, you hear a different message. You can't handle this without me. And once that belief takes root, your confidence begins to erode. Stoic philosophy teaches us that freedom starts in the mind. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." The manipulator knows this, and so their first target is your internal authority. They make you second-guess your choices. They plant seeds of guilt when you think about doing something independently. And when you try to step back, they remind you of how lost you were before they came into your life. It often starts in moments of vulnerability. You're recovering from failure, navigating change, or seeking clarity. That's when they step in, not as a guide, but as a quiet architect of your decision-making. They help you reorganize your life, but only in ways that keep them central to it. You stop trusting your own voice and start seeking theirs before every important move. Eventually, your confidence feels like it's tied to their approval. Imagine working closely with someone who praises your work publicly, yet always finds ways to correct you in private. At first, it feels like mentorship. But over time, their comments aren't about improvement, they're about control. They remind you of past mistakes even when you've moved on. They subtly compare you to others. They create confusion about what good enough really is, until eventually your worth feels like something they define. This is manipulation, not by force, but by erosion. The common trap is thinking that just because someone isn't overtly harmful, they're safe. That if they're not yelling, threatening, or isolating, they must have good intentions. But quiet manipulation is far more dangerous than loud aggression, because it rewrites your internal dialogue without resistance. You begin to adopt their voice as your own. And when that happens, you stop noticing the theft of your autonomy. The Stoic approach doesn't seek to fight manipulators head-on. It calls you to regain mental clarity, to think cleanly without emotional distortion. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. That includes the narratives others plant within you. So, how do you respond? Pause before accepting guidance from anyone who makes you feel smaller in the process. Pay attention to how you feel after conversations. Clearer or more confused? More grounded or more dependent? If someone's advice consistently diminishes your self-trust, that's not wisdom, that's control. One practice that restores your clarity is written reflection. Each night, write down one decision you made for yourself, without influence, without fear. As you begin to see those moments add up, your confidence returns. You no longer seek direction from those who benefit from your confusion. Manipulators don't stop because they're confronted. They stop because you stop believing in their necessity. When your mind becomes your own again, their power disappears. And in that moment, control shifts back, quietly but permanently. 3. Lies without conscience. The truth is stable. Lies require maintenance, and yet some people live as if reality is just another tool to be reshaped. They don't lie out of fear, they lie with intention, because deception gives them control. The more skilled they become at twisting facts, the more power they gain over your perception. And when you can no longer tell what's real, they own the narrative. That's not confusion. That's emotional engineering. A lie without guilt is a red flag no one should ignore. You may notice the small things first: a distorted retelling of an event you both witnessed, a denial of something they clearly said, a shift in the story when questioned. At first, you assume it's forgetfulness. But then the pattern grows. The facts always favor them. Their mistakes never exist. And if you confront them, they don't apologize. They deflect. They accuse. They make you feel like the unstable one. Slowly, your memory begins to fade. Not because you're losing it, but because you're being trained to doubt it. Manipulative people lie with precision. Not all at once, but layer by layer. Each falsehood builds on the last, until their version of events replaces yours. And once your mind accepts their version, you become easier to guide, easier to guilt, easier to control. That is why lies without remorse are not just dishonesty. They're a strategy of domination. Stoicism calls us back to what is observable and consistent. Marcus Aurelius warned, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth." Evil people do the opposite. They resist truth because truth limits their reach, and so they bend it, again and again. It's tempting to explain away dishonesty, especially from those close to us. We want to believe they didn't mean it, that it's stress or a misunderstanding. But those who lie without hesitation are not confused. They are deliberate. And the more second chances you offer, the more they refine their tactics. Imagine working under a leader who always takes credit for the team's wins, yet distances themselves from every mistake. At first, they charm you into loyalty. But when pressure rises, you notice your efforts vanish from reports. You hear them describing your work as their own. And when you speak up, they tilt their head and say, "You must be remembering it wrong." That small sentence? It plants doubt. And that doubt is the doorway they walk through to rewrite your reality. The danger isn't in the lie itself. It's in the erosion of your self-trust. Stoic practice demands that we return to what can be verified, to watch actions, to weigh patterns, to hold stillness when emotion clouds reason. When someone's story keeps shifting, when their words don't match their deeds, it's not overthinking to question, it's self-defense. One common mistake is assuming that being forgiving means accepting distortion. But Stoic strength draws the line between compassion and naivety. Forgiveness doesn't require blindness. You can remain calm and kind and still walk away. You can be thoughtful without being fooled. A simple practice is to write down key moments after they happen. What was said, what was agreed, what was promised. Over time, you will see what aligns and what keeps changing. You will see who treats memory as truth and who treats it as opportunity. The one who lies without conscience fears your clarity. Because once you stop doubting yourself, you stop depending on their version of events. And when their version loses power, so do they. What remains is your mind, clean, sharp, and your own. No story can control a person who trusts their perception more than someone else's persuasion. That's where your power returns, quietly, permanently, stoically. 4. Blame games and deflection. Guilt is a tool. And for the emotionally manipulative, it's their favorite one. Not because they carry any themselves, but because they know how easily it can be handed to someone else. Blame for them isn't about responsibility, it's about power. They don't seek resolution, they seek escape from consequence. And the more skilled they become at deflecting accountability, the more exhausted their victims feel trying to explain, prove, or fix what they never broke in the first place. You'll often find yourself on the receiving end of carefully crafted conversations. They won't yell, they'll question. Subtly, softly. "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" "I didn't say that. Maybe you misunderstood. I thought you knew what I meant." At first, these phrases seem innocent, but over time, they chip away at your clarity. Suddenly, you're apologizing for things you didn't do. You're defending your tone instead of addressing their behavior. You're walking on eggshells while they walk away untouched. This tactic isn't random. It's rehearsed. A toxic person's ability to shift the emotional spotlight away from themselves and onto you is the very thing that keeps their image clean and your confidence shaken. They reframe every situation where they fall short as a moment where you overreacted. And the more you try to clarify, the deeper you sink into a narrative you never created. This is not miscommunication, it's manipulation in disguise. Stoicism cuts through this noise. Seneca wrote, "Guilt is the price we pay for conscious wrongdoing, not for the projection of others." If someone repeatedly makes you feel like the problem, even when you've acted in good faith, it's time to step back. Clarity doesn't come from defending yourself louder. It comes from knowing when to stop engaging with distorted dialogue. This often plays out in professional settings. Picture working with a colleague who consistently misses deadlines, but each time the team reviews performance, they highlight your lack of coordination. They never confront directly. Instead, they plant doubts in your manager's mind, couching their critiques in calm, polished language. "I just think we need more structure. Maybe someone isn't tracking things carefully enough." Their tone stays neutral. The implication, however, is loaded. And if you raise the issue, you risk being seen as emotional or defensive. That's how they win, by staying cold while you burn out. The common mistake is believing that if you just explain yourself better, you'll be understood. But understanding isn't their goal. Their goal is to remain untouchable while keeping you off balance. So you double down on reason, hoping truth will clear the air. Yet with every word you speak, they twist it into proof of your instability. In time, your silence becomes your only peace. But even that, they'll try to frame as passive aggression. The Stoic alternative is not silence, but a boundary. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." You don't fight distortion with more dialogue. You restore your calm and withdraw your energy from games you never agreed to play. This isn't surrender, it's sovereignty. One practical way to regain emotional clarity is to document. When things feel off, write what was said, date it. Reflect on your tone, your words, and your intent. Then stop seeking approval from the person who weaponized confusion. Instead, ground yourself in your own integrity. Truth doesn't require their permission to exist. Blame only sticks when you accept it. Deflection only works when you chase it. And manipulation only thrives where there's emotional fog. When your mind becomes still, facts regain their shape. The truth doesn't need to be louder, it only needs to be yours. Hold it firmly, let their noise pass through, and protect your clarity like your peace depends on it, because it does. 5. Lack of empathy. Indifference reveals more than words ever could. Empathy isn't loud, but when it's absent, the silence is sharp. Someone who cannot or will not feel what you feel becomes dangerous not through what they say, but through what they refuse to acknowledge. You open up, and instead of warmth, you meet a cold pause, a quick deflection, or worse, a shift of spotlight back to them. This isn't oversight, it's emotional neglect disguised as casual conversation. Lack of empathy often hides behind polished responses. You share pain, and they nod, uninterested. You express joy, and they change the subject. Over time, these moments add up. Your emotions feel inconvenient to them. Their expressions remain neutral, even when you're unraveling. And the more you try to connect, the more isolated you feel. This isn't just a mismatch, it's a strategy to maintain distance and control. A person who lacks empathy isn't simply insensitive. They operate from a place where other people's experiences exist only as background noise. Your pain is tolerated, not supported. Your needs are observed, but never embraced. They mimic concern when necessary, but behind it lies detachment. And when you look closer, their interactions often feel rehearsed, as if performed rather than lived. This behavior becomes especially damaging when it appears in someone close, a partner, a friend, a mentor. You expect care. Instead, you find judgment or indifference. You share a personal struggle, and they counter with their own. You express worry, and they offer solutions without understanding the emotion beneath your words. The worst part isn't what they say, it's the feeling that you are alone in their presence. Stoic philosophy doesn't ask us to expect constant emotional validation. It encourages strength and self-reliance, but it also teaches discernment. Seneca wrote, "We are members of one great body. We must be kind to one another." Emotional detachment, when used as a weapon, becomes a silent form of harm. The Stoic mind recognizes this, not to judge others, but to protect itself from invisible erosion. The common misconception is that being strong means being unaffected. Many endure emotionally numb relationships because they believe asking for empathy is a weakness. But strength isn't the absence of feeling. It's the refusal to settle for relationships that drain your spirit under the guise of composure. Empathy is not a luxury, it's the foundation of human connection. Imagine sharing something personal with someone you trust, a recent loss, a moment of doubt, or a quiet fear. They respond not with presence, but with dismissal. You're being too sensitive, or it's not a big deal. You laugh it off, trying not to seem fragile. But inside, something sinks. And when this happens enough times, you stop sharing altogether. You edit yourself, you shut down. And that silence? It becomes a symptom of emotional depletion. Stoic clarity gives you the permission to walk away from emotional vacancy. It tells you to measure people not by their titles, but by their capacity to witness your humanity without turning away. Empathy is not weakness, it's awareness. And those who lack it consistently are not just emotionally distant, they are energetically dangerous. One practice that reclaims your strength is to name what you feel without needing a reaction. Say it for yourself, write it down, speak it aloud when alone. The point is not always to be heard by others, but to stay visible to yourself. When you name what's real, you don't get lost in their indifference. Empathy can't be forced, but your self-worth can be protected. Do not trade emotional safety for the illusion of stability. Those who cannot feel with you should not be allowed to speak into your life. Emotional neglect is quiet, but its damage is deep. Recognize it, refuse it, and choose instead the calm of being unseen over the pain of being dismissed. In that clarity, you begin to heal. Not because they changed, but because you finally chose to feel without asking for permission. 6. Pleasure in your pain. Some people don't just tolerate the suffering of others, they enjoy it. Not with loud cruelty, but with small, quiet moments. The smirk when you stumble, the spark in their eyes when someone else is humiliated, the silence that lingers just long enough to say, "You deserved it." This is not mere indifference. It is a darker hunger, the quiet thrill of feeling superior through someone else's weakness. And when someone regularly finds satisfaction in another's misfortune, they are not just toxic, they are corrosive. This kind of behavior doesn't show itself right away. In the beginning, they may seem like any other friend or colleague, observant, maybe even supportive. But time reveals patterns. When good news comes your way, they barely react or find a way to minimize it. When something bad happens, they listen longer, ask more questions, and linger just enough to watch you unravel. And they always frame their presence as care, when in fact, it's emotional voyeurism. They aren't with you to help you heal. They stay to see how deep you'll fall. The common misstep is thinking that someone like this is just a little competitive or blunt. But that's not the full picture. What defines this behavior is not what they say, but how they react to your vulnerability. Whether it's a mistake at work, a breakup, or even a moment of hesitation in your voice, they lean in, not out, not to support you, but to draw energy from your discomfort. It fuels their ego and masks their insecurity. Stoic philosophy exposes this for what it is: moral corruption in disguise. Epictetus advised, associate with those who make you better. A person who finds joy in your pain does the opposite. They chip away at your confidence, not with insults, but with silence. Not with confrontation, but with subtle delight. They need others to shrink so they can feel taller. And as long as you don't notice, they continue feeding on your emotional wounds. This shows up clearly in group settings. Imagine you're sharing a failure during a team debrief. Something went wrong, and you're taking ownership. Most people stay neutral or offer constructive support, but one person smiles a little too quickly. They nod too eagerly. Later, you hear they've repeated your mistake to others, exaggerated the impact, and turned it into a story. Not to build understanding, but to build themselves up in contrast to you. That's not feedback, that's quiet sabotage disguised as attention. The Stoic response isn't to retaliate, it's to detach. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Your protection is not in proving your pain or exposing their behavior. It's in refusing to collapse under it." When someone enjoys your setbacks, your best response is not performance, but presence. Not reaction, but restraint. Practically, one way to guard your peace is to pay attention to patterns in emotional energy. After interacting with someone, do you feel more grounded or more drained? Do you feel seen or do you feel watched? The difference is subtle, but it matters. The former fosters connection. The latter feeds on your struggle. It's easy to confuse people who don't say much with people who mean no harm. But silence is not always neutral. In some people, it hides intention. When they watch others fail without lifting a hand, when they amplify pain instead of softening it, they've made their choice. And now so must you. Walk away from those who only show up when things fall apart. Surround yourself with those who rise when you fall, not those who stare longer. Protect your dignity, not by demanding they care, but by refusing to let their enjoyment of your pain shape your worth. When you choose self-respect over reaction, their power ends, not with noise, but with your calm refusal to feed their ego any further. 7. Hunger for control. Control doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it wears the face of concern. It sounds like thoughtful advice, helpful warnings, and subtle questions about your choices. Yet behind that calm exterior lies a deeper motive, the desire not to guide, but to dominate. This form of emotional control isn't loud or obvious. It works in quiet repetition, eroding your independence until every decision you make feels filtered through someone else's approval. And when you lose that autonomy, you don't just lose freedom, you lose yourself. The hunger for control often begins with charm. A person enters your life offering structure, clarity, and solutions. You feel grateful for their guidance, especially during times of confusion or change. But slowly something shifts. Their advice becomes expectation. Their opinion becomes law. And when you deviate from it, discomfort creeps in. They question your judgment. They remind you of past mistakes. They package doubt as protection. You begin to second-guess yourself, not because you're unsure, but because they've trained you to think their way is always better. This shift is dangerous precisely because it feels helpful at first. Most people associate control with anger or force, but emotional control is quieter and more effective. It doesn't yell, it rewires. It rewards compliance with closeness and punishes independence with distance or guilt. You learn to avoid conflict not out of fear, but from the belief that they know better. And that belief, once planted, grows into self-distrust. Stoic philosophy cuts through this illusion. Epictetus reminds us, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. The one who seeks to control you doesn't just want influence. They want ownership of your thoughts. They want to stand between you and your choices. But Stoicism teaches that clarity begins when you reclaim your inner authority, when you return to yourself as the primary decision maker. This behavior often plays out in personal relationships. Picture someone you trust deeply, a partner, mentor, or friend, who insists on helping you make decisions. They ask questions that sound innocent but carry judgment. Are you sure you can handle that? Do you really think that's the right move? At first it feels like care, but over time you start hesitating. Not because you lack direction, but because their presence has become a gate you need to pass through before you act. That is not support. That is subtle domination. Many fall into the trap of confusing control with leadership. They mistake dominance for stability, structure for wisdom. But leadership builds capacity. Control erodes it. A real guide strengthens your confidence. A manipulator makes it conditional. They want you to succeed, but only through their map. And if you stray from it, they withdraw affection, introduce doubt, or highlight your past as evidence against your independence. The Stoic way is to train your mind to identify the moment your thinking shifts from clarity to permission-seeking. You don't need permission to be whole. You need alignment. And that alignment comes from stillness, not approval. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. When someone takes that power, they're not helping you. They're feeding on your uncertainty. A simple way to regain control is through intentional solitude. Spend 1 hour a week making decisions alone, without input, without justification. Reflect on how those decisions feel. With practice, your intuition becomes louder than their opinion. That shift is quiet but powerful. It breaks dependency, not with conflict but with conviction. Those who try to control you will not stop because you ask them to. They will stop when you no longer need them to think for you. Your freedom doesn't need defense. It needs clarity. And when you own your thoughts again, they can no longer own your life. 8. Isolation as a weapon. Influence becomes easier when you stand alone. That's what emotionally dangerous people understand better than most. They know connection makes you stronger, so they begin by weakening your circle. Not by tearing it apart, but by quietly pulling threads. One warning, one doubt, one planted suspicion at a time. The result isn't immediate. It's slow, subtle, and deeply effective. You don't wake up cut off. You drift, until one day, the only voice you hear is theirs. This tactic hides behind care. It sounds like concern. I don't think your friend really supports you, or your family doesn't understand you like I do. You interpret it as loyalty, maybe even protection. But what it builds is a filter, a wedge between you and everyone who used to be your anchor. And each time you try to reach back, that same voice reappears. Gentle but firm. They never really had your back, did they? When repeated enough, it becomes truth. Not because it is, but because isolation erodes your ability to check reality against another view. At its core, this behavior isn't just about power. It's about dependency. Someone who isolates you doesn't want your full heart. They want your full reliance. The fewer people you trust, the more you lean on them. And the more you lean, the easier it becomes to manipulate how you feel, what you believe, and how you define yourself. Emotional predators don't always attack you head-on. They remove your allies first. Then, when the storm comes, you have nowhere else to stand. This happens often in intimate relationships. Imagine someone who once encouraged your friendships, celebrated your family ties. Then, slowly, they begin making small remarks. A casual comment about your best friend being too competitive. A raised eyebrow when you laugh at an old story from your sibling. An uneasy tone when you mention dinner plans with someone outside your home. You don't notice it at first, but over time those relationships feel more distant. Not because they changed, but because your perception of them did. Stoicism warns against this kind of emotional dependency. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. But when someone controls your connections, they reverse that order. You become harsh with those who care and lenient with the one who isolates you. That is not discipline. That is manipulation of your sense of belonging. The mistake many make is confusing emotional fusion with closeness. Just because someone wants to be the center of your world doesn't mean they love you deeply. Sometimes it means they fear what happens if you realize you can live without them. Stoic self-sufficiency isn't about withdrawing from people. It's about choosing people who make you stronger, not smaller. Real closeness makes space for others. Control closes it. The practical antidote to isolation is deliberate reconnection. Reach out to one person whose presence once grounded you, not with explanation or apology, but with openness. Notice who makes you feel seen without needing to dominate the conversation. That's the energy you need to rebuild, and once you remember what that feels like, the fog begins to lift. You stop asking for permission to stay connected. You reclaim the relationships that were never broken, just quietly stolen from your view. When someone uses isolation as a weapon, they hope you won't notice until it's too late. But noticing is power. Seeing the pattern is freedom, and choosing reconnection is how you disarm it. Let your world expand again, not to escape someone's grasp, but to remember that you were never meant to live inside a single voice. The right people won't pull you away from others. They'll walk beside you while you grow. That is what safety feels like. And once you know it again, no one can take it from you. 9. Jealousy in disguise. Envy rarely walks in with fists clenched. It enters with a smile, dressed as support, framed as advice. It sounds like encouragement, but lands like a quiet insult. Instead of celebrating your progress, it asks why you haven't gone further. Instead of praising your success, it points to someone who did more. And while it rarely confronts directly, it always wounds subtly, one disguised remark at a time. Jealous people don't always compete out loud. They position themselves as your guide, your motivator, your voice of reason. But underneath that polished tone is an unrest they can't admit. Your growth threatens the image they've built of themselves. So rather than confronting their own stagnation, they chip away at your confidence. Not enough to destroy it, but just enough to keep you questioning it. This kind of emotional erosion often begins with feedback that sounds constructive. That's a good result, but I thought you were aiming higher. Nice presentation, though it reminded me of something I saw last year. The words seem helpful, but they land with an aftertaste of doubt. You reply to them. You shrink a little, and that small retreat is exactly what envy wants. Because it's not about your success, it's about making sure you don't feel secure in it. The dangerous part is that most people don't recognize this behavior early. We're trained to appreciate feedback, to stay humble, to listen. So when someone close to us consistently underplays our wins, we question ourselves, not them. But the Stoics taught differently. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." A jealous person isn't judging you, they're revealing their own emptiness. Their discomfort with your light doesn't mean you should dim it. You'll often notice this in long-term friendships. Imagine finally reaching a milestone, a promotion, a personal goal, or a creative breakthrough. You share it with someone you trust. They respond with a nod, a polite, "That's great," followed by a backhanded suggestion, "Just don't get comfortable." At first you take it as wisdom, but the pattern continues. Every win you share is met with restraint, deflection, or redirection. And over time, you stop sharing. Not because you've grown arrogant, but because your joy doesn't feel safe with them. That's when the shift must happen. Jealousy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's invisible until you learn how to feel it. Stoic awareness sharpens that sense. It teaches you to observe, not just what people say, but how you feel after they speak. Do you feel lifted or subtly diminished? Do their words energize your path or make you hesitate on it? These are not small signs. They're the pulse of something deeper. The mistake many make is responding with self-doubt. They begin altering their tone, holding back their pride, trying to make others more comfortable. But dimming yourself doesn't create harmony. It creates an imbalance. And in trying not to outshine someone else, you end up betraying your own fire. The Stoic response is not retaliation, it's clarity. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one. You don't need to confront envy, you need to walk in truth. When praise is genuine, you feel it in your chest. When it's poisoned, you feel it in your gut. Trust that difference, and protect your energy accordingly. One quiet practice that restores self-alignment is private celebration. Before you share your next win, sit with it in stillness. Write down why it matters, what it costs, and how it changes you. Let the recognition come from within first. When your pride is built on inner truth, external doubt becomes weightless. Jealousy thrives where insecurity is fed, but when you honor your progress without apology, its power dissolves. You weren't given your light to bury it in someone else's shadow. Let it burn, let it guide, and let it remind those around you that real strength never needs to tear anyone down to rise. 10. The unrepentant heart guilt can be uncomfortable, but it signals something essential, a conscience still awake. What's far more dangerous is the person who causes harm and feels nothing. No discomfort, no regret, no need to make things right. Instead of self-reflection, they double down. Instead of repairing damage, they justify it. The unrepentant heart doesn't just avoid growth, it denies responsibility altogether. At first, this kind of person may appear confident, composed, even admirable. They speak with certainty, dismiss criticism quickly, and present themselves as principled. But beneath that surface is an unwillingness to face themselves. Every wrong is someone else's fault. Every consequence is unfair. And if you confront them, they'll say you're too sensitive, too emotional, too unforgiving. Their defense is not explanation, it's deflection. Not truth, but control of perception. This mindset corrodes trust slowly. When someone refuses to acknowledge harm, they erase your experience. When they distort what happened to protect their ego, They don't just escape accountability, they twist reality. And the more you try to find common ground, the more you're made to feel irrational for needing closure. Eventually, you stop asking. Not because you've healed, but because you've given up expecting decency. Stoic philosophy doesn't demand perfection, but it demands responsibility. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." The Stoic path begins with self-honesty. The unrepentant person resists this entirely. To them, accountability is weakness. To the Stoic, it is power. A person who can own their actions becomes stronger. A person who avoids reflection becomes toxic because their pattern never ends. They don't grow, they repeat. You might see this in someone close, a partner, a parent, a longtime friend. Picture a moment where they say something cutting, something that clearly hurts. You bring it up calmly, they wave it off. "That's not what I meant." You try again carefully. "You're being dramatic." The conversation ends not with understanding, but with your silence. And that silence isn't peace. It's emotional exhaustion. A signal that no matter what you say, they will never truly listen, because they believe they never truly err. The mistake many make is trying harder, explaining better, staying patient, giving more chances. But change never comes from your effort alone. It requires willingness on their part. And someone who refuses to look inward cannot meet you halfway. Stoicism teaches you to recognize this without anger. Not everyone will grow, and not everyone should be close. The unrepentant heart thrives on unearned forgiveness. It counts on your empathy to avoid responsibility. But real forgiveness doesn't ignore patterns. It observes them. It sets limits. Epictetus said, "It is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them." Your job is not to fix the person who won't change. It is to shift how much power you give to their behavior. One quiet practice that reinforces self-respect is a boundary journal. When someone repeatedly refuses to acknowledge harm, write down what happened, without editing for their comfort. Track how many times they've deflected or dismissed. Don't use it to blame. Use it to see clearly. That clarity becomes the evidence you need to stop excusing what they never intend to correct. You don't need an apology to move forward. You need honesty with yourself. The person who won't say sorry is showing you exactly who they are. Believe them, and then protect your mind from being reshaped by their denial. Not every chapter needs closure. Some require distance. The Stoic doesn't seek control over others. They seek control over their own reactions. So walk on, not in bitterness, but in freedom. The weight they refuse to carry no longer belongs to you. That's not surrender, that's self-respect returned to its rightful place. Quiet, steady, unshakable, stoic. Evil doesn't always announce itself, it doesn't always look cruel. Sometimes it appears quiet, kind, even helpful. But the signs are there. Subtle manipulations, calculated charm, lies without remorse, blame-shifting emotional detachment, control masked as care, and joy taken in your pain. These aren't just difficult behaviors, they are warning signals, clear evidence that someone may be draining your energy, eroding your confidence, or distorting your truth. Stoic wisdom teaches us not to control others, but to master ourselves. You don't need to confront every toxic person. You only need to become too grounded to be moved by them. Awareness is your first shield. Clarity is your greatest defense. And daily practice is what turns insight into strength. Each of the 10 signs you've heard today is not just a red flag, it's a mirror. A chance to observe without reacting. A chance to choose differently. By understanding how emotional predators operate through deflection, control, and erosion, you begin to reclaim what belongs to you. Your peace, your inner freedom, and your self-respect. Train yourself to pause before reacting. Reflect before absorbing someone else's energy. Guard your mental space like you guard your home. And remember, calmness is not passivity, it's precision. It's knowing what deserves your attention and what doesn't. If you've recognized any of these signs in your life, know this: you're not alone. And your clarity today can become your boundary tomorrow. Share your story in the comments, not just to be heard, but to help others who may be walking the same road. Practice this awareness daily. Protect your energy stoically. And walk forward with strength, not in noise, but in quiet certainty, because that is where real power begins.